Your hosts are Jared and Jason, and you have arrived at the after party. The crown winner of last week is Mr. Bloom, financially gifting $35. God bless you and congratulations. Thank you very much, Mr. Bloom. Second place was a tie. $10 financial gift, both from Piers Taylor and OG Snoop. Thank you both very much, and congratulations as well. Of course, you may financially gift on Entropy, which will be up in a moment. You can also watch the stream over there and ask and vote on questions. You also have the option of Cash App for financial gifting. The descriptions or the URLs for both are down in the description. So check it out. Jared and I evenly share the financial gifts with our guests here on the after party. Today, we are with the one and only Loralee on tap for the first tap of the year. Happy New Year, Loralee. Please introduce yourself to our esteemed community, for those out there who don't know who you are, and tell them where they can find you. And then Mr. George will take us into what is bound to be an epic conversation.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be here with these esteemed men of the West and really looking forward to a conversation about Prometheus. And to find me, well, rather than spell it all out, I think you're going to be showing my website or something like that in the chat or wherever you do those kinds of things. But just basically, I am a Jungian astrologer, and incorporated into that is study of psychology, human behavior, and historical cycles that show and help us understand stages of evolution, psychological development within humanity at large. So that's me.
Well, welcome to, as my friend Jason said, the first tap of 2022. And it is interesting to be bringing in a new year with you, Loralee. Loralee has been on the after party a number of times in the past. If you want to put her name into the search on theafterparty.tv and see what we've spoken about in previous episodes, a lot has been, excuse me, on Lord of the Rings as a metamyth for the West, a huge project that you are still undertaking. Is that right? How is there new material in the works?
Well, to be perfectly honest, everything has been somewhat on hold for really the last couple of years due to the events of the larger world, things happening in my personal life, and just trying to wrap my head around the way things are going in the larger world. So it's kind of distracted me from the episode I was working on a couple of years ago, and that was on everything to do with light, because light is a prominent theme in Lord of the Rings, namely that one of the main characters, Galadriel, is the Lady of Light. And because of that, and the way I work with mythology in this capacity is to employ a technique called amplification, where you take symbols and characters in myth and in dreams and amplify them by looking at what is the symbolism. So you unpack the symbolism, and it turns out light is a very deep subject and extremely fascinating subject from a scientific perspective and just a contemplative perspective. You know, what is light? Well, light is the life force of the universe, and as Tolkien displays it in his myth is through Galadriel, the Lady of Light. So my work so far on that has been more in the direction of exploring the science and looking into the science of light, and how can we, little humans down here on planet Earth, learn more about the nature of light, and by doing so, employ some of that understanding and apply it to our day-to-day lives. Light is obviously all around us. We are made of light. Everything's made of light if you boil it right down. And so, what can that mean for us? A deeper understanding of the science of light and the metaphysical symbolism of light. I think diving into that can bring us a lot of knowledge, of understanding, and tools to move us through these extremely difficult times that we're in right now.
Mm. I remember you giving us a little teaser about that and what you were working on. I know when we the Lord of the Rings themed episode, obviously you've been on different specials and things like that too, but the main episodes where it's just you in the hot seat like today, we spoke about we kind of set up the general, as I said, your take on Lord of the Rings, the films in particular, because the imagery, we live in such a visual age, and those films came at the right time as the century opened, interestingly enough.
Boy, sure did.
And they were very popular, so they gave a lot of us a common vocabulary or set of symbols. And then you related that to some of the things, the bottleneck that's going on in the West right now. So we talked about that in general. And then we had specific episodes talking one about masculine and ideals of masculine and roles men can play. And then we did one about women, the different archetypes, Galadriel, who you just mentioned being one of them. And again, I read the books when I was a kid, but I hadn't seen all the films, believe it or not, when Loralee was on. So for anyone who hasn't, even if you're not big into Lord of the Rings, even if it's not really your thing, I do think you can still get a lot out of these episodes. It doesn't require a fluency in that world to get a lot out of it.
No.
So Loralee's videos are on her site, and they're very well done. And then, if I may say, I think her tap episodes are a nice companion to those. But I think we'll be probably continuing today with some of those themes and the setup.
Yeah.
This long conversation we've been having for the last few years since we've come into contact, and you were first on with us in July of 2019. But I know this is kind of a big ask, so take your time, and maybe we'll pepper in questions along the way. But as we sit here at the opening of 2022, what is kind of your dream analysis of the waking dream? What we're experiencing with the challenges in the West, with the COVID agenda worldwide. How do you take kind of a bird's eye view of it, kind of symbologically and mythologically, to, I guess, with an eye on, especially relevant to what we're about here, giving people meaning, giving people something they can hook into, and not just feeling like it's this out there force that they have no control over, and they're just watching this crazy, or maybe not watching because that's passive, but being swept along in this crazy movie that no one really wanted or thought they wanted, But what is your take on what we're all going through right now?
Well, wow, that is a big question, but I'll try and be succinct.
Start the year off big and ambitious.
Well, maybe we could just rewind a little bit back to January of 2020. And the reason for that is that in January of 2020, there occurred a Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn. Now, the cycles of Saturn-Pluto combinations are associated with major changes, not only in the human psyche, but generally appear as big events in the larger world, like earth-shattering, ground-shaking kinds of events. And we can follow this cycle all the way back to 410 BC and see that every time Saturn and Pluto come into relationship, there occurs, and it's associated with revolution, rebellion, plague, you name it, all the so-called catastrophes that cause ripples through the human psyche, and the result of which winds up being some kind of deep transformation. Saturn is the symbol of the shadow, and Pluto is the symbol of deep transformation and metamorphosis. So when these two characters, who are of course gods in mythology and therefore represent archetypal forces in the human psyche, so we can think of these characters, whether they're from Greek mythology or any other mythology, including Lord of the Rings and Jason's myth, Prometheus myth. These characters are ways of imagining and understanding these forces of nature that are at work in the human psyche all the time. And what astrology helps us to do is follow these patterns of these coming togethers, if you will, of particular archetypal forces. And where Saturn and Pluto are concerned, these are the biggies, because they both are concerned with revealing the shadow. That is both at the personal level. So Saturn deals more with personal shadow. That is the unresolved, undigested complexes within us as individuals. And then the degree to which we as individuals are unconscious of our own capacities for evil, then we wind up projecting that into the larger collective psyche. So Pluto represents the collective unconscious, and therefore the shadow material, the unresolved stuff hiding in the dark corner of the basement within the larger, or the humanity at large. So when these two characters come together, it does shake up the psyche for the purposes of metamorphosis, of greater advancement, of bringing to the surface that which needs to be seen. And I describe these combinations of Saturn and Pluto as boil lancing, because that is the most, I think, appropriate image to consider when we're talking about these kinds of dynamics. And as probably most of us understand, if you have a big old ugly boil on your body, let's say on your arm, the reality is that that thing is not going to just sort of go away on its own. It needs to be lanced. That is, the poison, the toxins need to be released in order for healing to take place. And symbolically speaking, what is contained in that ugly pus that comes out of the boil is all of this shadow, this dark, well, I won't use the word dark because that's confusing, but let's say the toxic elements within the psyche are released, and thereby we are forced to see and to experience in some way evil. And I always say, and it's been the motivating factor in all of my work for the last 44 years now, is to understand the nature of evil. Because my feeling is that without a more sophisticated understanding of evil, we, the people, tend to be just swept along by the deception that evil uses to conquer us. And every time Saturn and Pluto come together in their various formulations, this kind of issue is lifted to the surface. This boil lancing process is what is required. So this is what began in January of 2020. This was opened up like, hey folks, here we are. Got a little bit of boil lancing, actually a lot of boil lancing to deal with here. And so through the course of 2020, we were just being opened up to something that was happening to all of humanity. And so that year, 2020, or most of the year up until the winter solstice, which I'll get to in a minute, but through the duration of that year, most of us were just kind of in shock, like, what is this? What do we do? Where is this coming from? And of course, the spell of fear was cast over pretty much every human being on Earth, and that the foe have been able to perpetuate that fear, that spell. And so what, by the time we get to the winter solstice of 2020, many of us were beginning to question, like, okay, wait a minute, what is this? And questioning, like, is what we're being told the truth? And what is the truth about this thing, this great terror now coming down upon humanity? And so the winter solstice then of 2020 brought an interesting dynamic, and that was a combination of Jupiter and Saturn in the sign of Aquarius. Now, this took place like almost exactly right at the time of the winter solstice, which I think is extremely significant. Number one, because the winter solstice marks the longest night of the year, therefore the shortest day and the least amount of light. So the sign of Aquarius is associated with the myth of Prometheus. So having Jupiter and Saturn come together on that moment, that very special moment of the winter solstice, to me represented the awakening of the Promethean spirit in the human psyche. And from there, I was hoping to see this spark light up the larger torch, and this light, this consciousness of freedom and defying tyranny was starting to awaken in the human soul. And that was at work through the duration pretty much of 2021. And then just again on the shortly after the winter solstice, 2021, we saw the last of a combination of Saturn and Uranus. Uranus is the ruler of Aquarius, so I consider Uranus to be like the Promethean torch. And Saturn was in the sign of Aquarius, the one that Uranus rules. So this Promethean spirit has been growing and developing over the course of this past year. And from what I see at this point, it is now blazing around the world. There is upcoming on I believe it's the 22nd and 23rd of January this year, coming up, there's going to be a worldwide freedom rally. Cities, countries around the world are gathering together to challenge the ruling order, doing pretty much what Prometheus did in the Greek myth. Prometheus defied the ruling order of Zeus. And would it be worthwhile for me to just briefly go over that myth? Yeah? Okay. So the Greek myth, and by the way, there are many versions of these myths. Okay, so there's not one myth that is perfect and says it all. There's many versions, but the one that speaks to me, and therefore that's the one I will talk about, is that of Prometheus being a Titan. The Titans were precursors to the human race. And Prometheus, therefore, had a great deal of compassion for the humans who were suffering at that time because they had no heat or light. And Prometheus, out of his compassion, approached Zeus one day and begged Zeus to provide the humans with fire. Well, Zeus, in fear that if he gave the humans fire they would become more powerful than the gods, refused. Well, Prometheus, being the bringer of freedom, defied Zeus, snuck into the back door of Olympus one night, stole the sacred fire, and brought it to humanity. Well, when Zeus discovered the theft, he could not take the fire back, but he decided that Prometheus was to be punished, and his punishment was to be chained up to a rock on a far-off mountain peak. And every day Zeus was to send his eagle to chew out Prometheus' liver. And during the night, the liver would grow back, and the next day the eagle would come again, and this was to be Prometheus' fate for eternity. However, eventually another god came onto the scene, and I think this may be the story for this coming year. And that god was Chiron. Chiron was a centaur god, and he was a great wise teacher. And Chiron's job was to roam the forests with his group of chelas, who were the warriors and the heroes who would come to seek his counsel. And so Chiron would roam the forests and expound at length on the wonder of nature and the beauty of herbs and healing. One day, however, Chiron was wounded by an arrow that had been dipped in the blood of the Hydra. The Hydra is a dragon-like creature that lived in the underworld. The poison of the Hydra was so deadly that this was a wound that would never heal. And even all of Chiron's knowledge and wisdom of herbs, healing, and magic could not heal the wound. And because he was a god, he couldn't die. So he suffered incredibly as a result of this, until finally one day he approached Zeus and begged that Zeus exchange his destiny for that of Prometheus. Well, Zeus, in a rare moment of compassion, agreed. And so the soul of Chiron went to the underworld in place of Prometheus. And Zeus even set a constellation in the heavens, that being Sagittarius, of the centaur god, to honor his sacrifice. And Prometheus was freed and went on to bring to humanity the gifts of civilization, of architecture, of mathematics, and science. And so Prometheus is really this bringer of light and of all things that provide us with life on earth, especially for us in modern times. It is this technology that we are wrestling with right now that is both a gift and a curse from Prometheus. And I know that we were going to discuss today some of, I guess, what I would call the shadow side of this Promethean gift. So is that good for the moment?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we inject too that, as you said a moment ago, there's different takes on the Prometheus myth, and in contemporary terms, it's very, very, very interesting to note that term has been invoked in several places by several people. Of course, Jason here, but it seems concurrent with Jason's publishing of his book that other people were invoking that as well. A few too many to be coincidence. So first, just to get this on the record, to say that there are certain traditions, Gnosticism, and certain interpretations of Christianity, even though it's not a Christian myth, that equate Prometheus with Lucifer because of the bring of the light and the rebellious aspect. So I think someone here needs to just give some kind of a caveat or disclaimer that that's not the kind of thing that's being invoked here. because again, that term is used, the name, I should say, Prometheus, is used in a lot of different contexts by a lot of different people, and it could get confusing.
Yes. Well, and I would say perhaps the reason that Prometheus and this myth is being discussed is because it has been awakened in the human psyche. It's like it's in the zeitgeist. And if we think of these characters in myth as forces of nature that rise up in the human psyche, that is, they become more conscious. And so I was actually pleased to see all kinds of discussion around Prometheus appearing in the zeitgeist. And I would, or at least I understand that all of these characters or these archetypes have a shadow side. And what that means is, yes, we can look at the qualities of Prometheus, the god, and say, wow, isn't he great? He brought us all these gifts and civilization and science and mathematics, and it's all wonderful. However, the shadow side then is what is done then with these great gifts. And the shadow side, in terms of how it's manifesting in our time, I would say it is this transhumanist expression that is actually moving us away from being human.
So that's the shadow side you're saying, is the
Yeah.
energies are out there no matter what.
Yes.
And when we say, oh, we don't like, we're skeptical, to put it mildly, of this transhumanism stuff, it's actually two sides of the same coin. You're saying is that we have to make sure we balance it and harmonize it with proper things. And that kind of, I know this is a little speculative, talking and swirling about the symbology of it, but before this thread of the conversation gets lost, I'd like to, you just reminded me of something I was thinking a few minutes ago when you mentioned the transhumanism and the dark, the shadow side of Prometheus. Is that part of the significance? Not that they knew when they wrote these myths what was going to happen now in 2022, but just how we can interpret it and use our minds around it now. What you said about Chiron, and Chiron being into the herbs and the natural remedies,
that's right.
and how that was sacrificed for the Promethean. Now, on the one hand, even taking away the transhumanist elements, the civilizational aspects, I don't think any of us here would poo-poo that. I know it's very easy right now. I've seen the memes about Ted Kaczynski going back into the woods and everything, but Jason and I tell people all the time, okay, yeah, you're really you're gonna walk away from, when you go get your tooth pulled, there's no Novocaine. Like, if you want out of civilization, you want out of civilization, totally. I mean, it's us people's Western man, everything about us is going to be looking to improve our well-being and ideally work with, but still be manipulating and measuring the natural world through our tools, through our technologies. So maybe, I apologize because this is spinning into a bigger theme, but I'll just quickly say, I guess it's all tied though, that I've been thinking about this technology as and I know people say, well, where's the line? But technology is something that enhances or is this add-on to our natural lives. I don't have a problem with that categorically. When I see things like technologies trying to replace natural life, like virtual reality and some of the things that are going in that direction, I think people are right to sound alarms about that. And I think we may have to slice and dice that and make sure that people aren't throwing the baby out with the bathwater when they use this broad word technology.
Mhm.
because there's a distinction between augmenting and helping your natural life and then replacing. I think there is a line of distinction there, and like anything,
Yeah.
there's a gradient. You know, there might be gray areas, but overall, just for the sake of conversation, I think we need to put a dividing line between augmenting your natural life versus replacing it. But uh, I'll get back to where I started, and again, I know this is kind of big and swirling, balancing a few different things, but they're all related. When you talked about Chiron's death, or switching um, his fate with Prometheus, it seemed like you were saying that there would be this kind of natural way of herbs and etc. would go under, and there would only be this kind of uh, well, I don't know what to call it, but I guess like a higher technology sort of thing. And what I see from people, what interests me, I know it might sound idealistic, and I don't really know where the rubber meets the road with some of this stuff. I'm not a scientist or a researcher, but I have seen people who are more interdisciplinary. This has been happening for decades now, but they're really having a moment now, as you could imagine, who study the sciences and have that hard-nosed research empirical side, but they want to incorporate, for lack of a better word, the old ways back into that, and say it's not this either or, where you're either this dream catchers on the wall, head in the clouds, you know oh, just sniff some essential oils and everything will be fine. It's like there's like a stereotype that and hey, a lot of the West, our technology, we had to deal with superstition. So
Yeah.
yeah, we certainly don't want to fall back into this kind of chthonic superstition type thing. But I think a lot of people are seeing it. And again, I don't want to speak out of turn because it's not like I've done hard and fast research on this. So it might just be a prejudice of mine. But it does seem that even though, yes, I do appreciate the fact that I could go get my tooth pulled and have Novocaine and all the wonders of science and
Mhm.
technology, but there does seem to be something that's gotten so far away from nature in certain aspects of our science and technology that
Right.
it wouldn't be such a bad thing to understand, why not, instead of making things in a lab, why isn't the first place we look to the herbs and the plants that grow in forests, and
Mhm.
re-examine those things even energetically. There's this, again, I don't know how speculative it is, but there are these frontiers interdisciplinary of science where it kind of blends science with um, the use of those herbs, or even on a frequency level, like what the frequencies and emanating from these plants, let's
Mhm.
say, and how they might, or that there's like frequencies to diseases in your body and how that could be offset. There's a whole thing about frequency medicine too. And again, I don't know how woo-woo that is. It's just the first thing that came to my mind. But just the fact, I'm saying, don't hang your hat on that one example. What I'm saying is the direction, the interdisciplinary direction of combining the natural with the scientific.
Mhm.
Do you think that like, is that the ideal? Is that the harmony we're being asked to try to meld these two things, bring these tensions together better?
I would say yes, and that the igniting of the Promethean torch is the reality that we can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. The technology is here already. And what we have to deal with, though, is the ring of power, that it's the power shadow that uses this technology that is a gift and turns it against us because it's anti-life. And this transhumanist agenda is the defiance of that which is alive and living and our basic nature. And this this is what we humans are having to wrestle with right now, and it's part of this Boyle Lansing experience. It's this reality that these things, this technology in all its forms, is here. It's not going to go away. And yeah, you can go live in a cave if you want. It's kind of hard to do these days. I mean, even finding a cave is probably pretty difficult. But
real estate has soared in the cave market.
exactly, a lot of people are going, looking for caves. But the reality is, it's not going to go away, and it has been taken up, let's say, as a weapon against us. And this is what it means to have a deeper understanding of the nature of evil, because it's always dressed up as something great. Isn't it wonderful? We have all this technology and we can live in a 3D world, and we can, have endless injections that, confer health, apparently. And this is what we're supposed to believe in now, that natural life is somehow old. Like, oh, well, we don't need nature and natural things anymore. We can just sail off into this virtual world and download our brains into God knows what. I mean, these are the things that are being told to us, that this is going to be this great thing. We're going to live forever, and won't it be wonderful, and all of this stuff.
They're doing it out of the kindness of their hearts for
always,
everybody, for all of
because
us.
they
Yeah.
care about us so much. Yeah. And that's the ultimate deception, to use human compassion, this natural thing that we are born with, this sense of compassion for suffering that Prometheus had. He sacrificed himself out of his compassion and care for humanity. And Chiron did the same thing. You see, another way to understand the relationship there between Chiron and say Prometheus, it is that Chiron represents the wisdom of nature. And Chiron didn't like die and disappear, right? He was given a constellation in the heavens to honor his wisdom, and that is the constellation of Sagittarius, the centaur. And so Chiron didn't disappear. Instead, he went on to do his healing work in the underworld. And in the Greek myths, the underworld was, it wasn't like the equivalent of hell in the Christian myth, but rather the underworld was the place where the souls of the dead went, and they had a kind of, well, disembodied life there. But nothing new happens in the underworld. So they were there, and they were like reviewing the life that they had lived. But it wasn't like this place of burning and suffering, and the way we think of the Christian version of hell. And so Chiron did not stop doing his healing work, but rather drop down into this deeper layer, I would say, of the human psyche, where we all have access to the knowledge and wisdom of the earth, of plants, of healing. We know how to do that. We've always known how to do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here now talking about it, would we? I mean, you can go back thousands and thousands of years to see and learn how human beings figured out what plants provided what sources of healing. And initially, that wisdom, that knowledge, it was the work of the women, while the men went off to protect the realm. The women were dedicated to feeding their children and taking care of the basic needs of the tribe. And so they learned, they figured out, okay, if you've got this problem, you take this herb. And this great body of wisdom was shared mostly through stories, through telling stories. And then when language or when writing or some means of keeping that knowledge and passing it on, then this stuff was written down. Okay, this plant works for this, and if you have this other problem, you use this other plant. And that all of that knowledge is still with us. However, a lot of it has been buried, I would say, by design, to keep us away from that deep knowledge. But it's really started to open up a lot more, certainly in the last couple of years. And for any of us who've, gotten into various forms of natural healing and learning about these things, that information has been around for many decades as well. So it's returning, that wisdom, that knowledge is returning and is available to just about anybody now. And yes, it does go over the edge in some cases, like anything. However, we can take it upon ourselves as individuals to learn about these things and to try them out and converse with healers of various kinds to figure out what is useful and what's not for our own health and well-being.
So yeah, we've used the last several minutes to clarify some of the things that have been spoken about so far, and the names that came up, Prometheus and Chiron. But I want to compass my conversational instinct is pointing us back to where we began and continuing on that thread now, where you were talking about the beginning of 2021, but this past year up until now and the opening of 2022 and what you see ahead, again, is to reframe or reassert the initial question of the show, which is if you look at the march of the themes in the news, the characters, some of the internationally famous people behind all of the things that are going on, COVID and otherwise, of course, because it all relates. What we talk about, the attacks on the peoples of European descent, and our having the rug pulled from under us, psychologically attacked, now physically attacked, and losing a sense of place in the world too, for a lot of us. All of this as like I said, the kind of the march or the sequence of the news stories and the characters and the themes and what's being asked of the public, is to kind of give your Jungian symbolic dream analysis of a dream analysis of waking life, and that kind of give people a vocabulary, symbolically of what they're seeing, because we live in this very imagistic world where we're seeing these images online on our social media feeds every day. So we have common points of reference, but we're all probably ingesting them and interpreting them in wildly different ways. And so, being that you've made a life out of studying symbols and archetypes, you might be able to provide some clarity into what these things people are seeing and hearing every day.
hmm Well, first of all, maybe I could just pick up on sort of where I left off regarding the transition th- through the end of 2021 and what has shifted now for 2022, and what at least I feel is a harbinger for things to come. And what causes me to consider this is the fact that Jupiter, which, by the way, is, of course, Zeus, has moved out of Aquarius and into Pisces, and that happened on the 30th of December. And Jupiter will be spending most of the year going through the sign of Pisces. Now, Pisces is the sign associated with compassion. And so this is what gives me a sense that, well, it's like manifest in the myth where Zeus has a rare moment of compassion for the suffering of Chiron and then honors him and puts Chiron into the sky, so to speak, so that his sacrifice will never be forgotten. In other words, this impulse for compassion and caring that is a part of being a human. It's what motivated Prometheus, and it is also what motivated Chiron and Zeus. And so I suspect that what we're starting to see here is a reawakening of a kind of compassion for each other, and but a measured kind of compassion. In other words, there can be the shadow side of compassion, which is or would show up as just, you're so compassionate about every little bit of suffering, running around rescuing and saving and winding up being a victim due to being undiscerning with regards to what is part of our human nature, which is to have compassion.
Or
And
hurting other people.
exactly, yeah. And Jupiter is the uh, astrological symbol associated with higher levels of the mind. The search for knowledge, wisdom, and truth is a Jupiterian exploit, and we're certainly being forced, I would say, to open doors that we maybe ordinarily would not have bothered with. We're being forced to open up to other realms of wisdom, if you will, having to do with natural healing and so forth, but also having to do with how can we use the technology that has come to us as a gift from Prometheus. This Promethean spirit within us has created this stuff. And but until we become wiser about the nature of evil, we're not going to understand that what is given as a gift can be used by the forces of evil against us. And I think that's what we humans are seeing right now. And it's hard to wrap our heads around that, because what is appearing is really manifestation of deep psychopathology. And it's important that we understand what that means. There's been a lot of chatter recently going around based on Dr. Robert Malone's discussion with Joe Rogan, and
Yes,
yeah,
I actually listened to that.
yeah, it was quite interesting to say the least. But he used this term mass formation psychosis, and it's a term that came from someone named Matthias Desmet. That's where the original term came from.
Mhm.
But what what it means to me, or at least I would say that this term mass formation psychosis is just a new rendering of what Jung talked about, 100 years ago almost. He called it participation mystique. And Jung was trying to understand what happened in Germany, and also in Russia and Italy, wherever this tyrannical beast rose up. And Jung was trying to understand what this was like. How is it that good, normal human beings can suddenly, and almost suddenly, it does appear almost suddenly, this effect of like a mass hypnosis, and the term mass formation actually comes out of the study of like birds, how birds will flock together. That's called a formation. And fish do it too, schooling fish, where they all kind of instantly all start moving together as one. And I think that this is worth contemplating, this idea of what is now being called mass formation psychosis.
Well,
Yes.
you were talking about shadow sides, and this is the
Yeah.
shadow side of the mere fact that most people, by definition, have to go along to get along. Like, not everybody's a leader. That's just how it
No.
works. I think that the question then is, it becomes more about who is who's leading, and what the
Yeah.
ethics and the direction is, and
Yeah.
why there's such a, I mean, people have that need, of course, to fit in and be part of what's going on. That in and of itself, as I said, that's just a fact of life. I think it's neutral. It's not good or bad. Obviously, it has ramifications that are harmful or positive. I mean, it's interesting. I know what you just said might ruffle feathers. I mean, I don't there's all kinds of things we hear and don't hear about history. I mean, Jung was there living in Europe, so
Yeah.
maybe we take him a little bit more seriously as a first someone observing it. I thought the Joe Rogan Malone thing, it's funny, they're so willing to question everything, and then I'm not saying I have it all figured out on this issue, but obviously it's something relevant to us and people who care about being of European descent and what's gone on. Because here's what I'm getting at. I know you've talked about this related to everything we're talking about today in previous conversations we've had. There's guys like that are so willing to look at, oh, we might be being lied to, shell game, leaders manipulate us, blah, 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 blah. But we just have to get back to this exact thing we were told about post 1945 morality. They don't even have the wherewithal to realize that they can't question that at all. And again, I'm not saying I have this all figured out, and I know there's a wide range of people's opinions and feelings on this, but it does seem that there was we've talked about this, the post 1945 world order, politically and morally, the narratives post 1945. The stories we were told about World War II and the era leading up to it, and the symbols and the villains and the good guys and the this and the that come from it, all inform our world every day, the world we were all born into, our parents were born into. So it seems we've talked about, again, I know we've talked about this, that everything you're talking about today, when you talk about boil lancing, from what I'm hearing, it's all of these toxins are coming to the surface of what doesn't work about this, or what's been swept under the rug. And so it is interesting to me that you'll have people like Malone and Rogan willing to question everything going on now, but
Mhm.
don't question at all that everything we were told about that is 100% true, and they're basing their morality on, hey man, the world just needs to get back to that, get back to Nuremberg, and then
Mhm.
the spirit of the Nuremberg trial somehow is like go the ground zero where we start from, and then it's all kumbaya, and
Mhm.
it's been tried before, you know. I mean, we talk about the 60s a lot too. It's,
Yeah.
you know, it seemed like a nice idea.
Yeah.
All you need is love, and everyone's
Right.
singing together, and
Mhm.
but it's really it's usually white people who are the ones who are pushing that stuff anyway, and then we've seen the
Mhm.
fallout of all this. So
Yeah.
so let me get back to, let me try to put a point on this then. A term you used just rang in my ears that might be apropos of what I'm trying to say, and it's that balanced compassion. So I
Mhm.
talk all the time about boundaries, proper boundaries,
Yeah.
and there has to be a flow between, you know, reciprocal compassion and help and exchange, whether it be with your neighbor or with another culture, people from another culture at large. Um, that's not going away in the kind of interconnected, fast travel world we have. Um, but I'm interested in what you said about the balanced compassion,
Mhm.
because like you know, there's that one level of, you realize like we do share space together to some degree, but then again, it's um, boundaries still confirm meaning, and sometimes you have to take care of what's going on in your house, whether that's literally your house or your people, your civilization. And obviously, we're at this, you know, crucial point in our people's history, our civilization's history.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, and most importantly, we have to take care of our own shadow. That's the real issue here. And that's what
do you mean
happened.
Western? Like when you say who's the us there? You're talking about Western peoples,
Yes.
and what do
Yeah.
you identify as the shadows of the Western peoples?
Um, a naivete, a kind of naivete, eh, in the sense of that everyone else is like us, the men and women of the West, because
Projection.
all of this mythology comes from the men of the West. I mean, from the Greeks, and the Greeks got it from the ancient, far more ancient peoples of the Arctic homeland. So, and that's what I think Lord of the Rings is all about too. I mean, Tolkien derived his story. He wrote that this story came to him through the languages, because he was a
Yes.
linguist, and
Yes.
he heard the the language, and because his amazing knowledge, like the guy spoke 35 languages or something, these
Hmm.
ancient,
Hmm.
dialects of the peoples of Northern Europe. And so he wrote that out of this understanding, this knowledge of these languages, he said that the story came to him whole, like it was the whole thing, and like a download, I guess you'd say. And then he just kind of wrote it down. But what he was reaching into was something much more ancient than the Greeks. I mean, we get our, these myths of Prometheus and Zeus and so forth. That comes primarily from the Greeks, and then the Romans took it over, and basically it was the same sort of stories, and they just had little slightly different names for the characters, but the archetypes are there. And but these are the myths of the men of the West, or Western kind, as Jason likes to say. this is our mythology. We're not born in Africa. We don't come from these other places, and they have their wonderful mythology and the things that are speaking to their psyche. Every culture, every race, I would say, needs to dig deeply into their ancient mythology and spiritual traditions to find whatever it is in them that serves the life force of the universe. That ultimately this is about the life force of the universe that we as humans have lost a deep connection with. And this is what we have to regain. And I would say that it is the foe, the forces of evil, that have interfered in not only our, meaning the men of the West, our capacity to reach in and find the truths in these stories, but it's happened to everyone, all human beings, whatever race, culture, creed you are. This foe has put the black clouds of Mordor over your ability to tap into what is life really all about, and what is it that we all can come together, like the fellowship, elves, dwarves, hobbits, and men have to come together and overcome their little squabbles in order to stand up to an enemy that's coming for us all.
Well, okay, using the Lord of the Rings, then again, I don't think someone has to be super familiar with it to understand what I'm about to say. And I'm not, like I said, it's not something I'm really conversant in tremendously. What is the best way to draw from that light and that life force, maybe represented by the high elves, versus the aspect of Tolkien's story where the ultimate journey is about, unlike many other myths where you attain a magical object, Lord of the Rings is about discarding of a magical object. Frodo needs to destroy the Ring of Power.
Yeah.
So is this, especially for Western peoples, is it Tolkien saying, and I know you said he kind of downloaded it, so
yeah,
you could say the ancestral spirit speaking through Tolkien. Is it that to tie it back to the Promethean aspect, our ability to overcome nature, if taken too far, is destructive, and so we need to get rid of that? Or is it a misplaced Christian Catholic guilt on Tolkien's part of feeling like it's wrong to play God and thus not claim this inner power? Like what's the way to use inner power? Because obviously there is a way, again, represented especially by the elves, who seem to have these refined senses and heightened powers and are in tune with the light and represent some kind of aspect or potential or archetype, right? There's a way to do it, and I don't remember all the details. That's why I'm asking you. What's the way to tap into that correctly? And what is he saying conversely where you're discarding of this Ring of Power? Why is it about getting rid of the Ring of Power?
Well, it's the issue of power that is the problem. That once we little humans, we aren't gods, but once we come into knowledge of the kind of power that is now everywhere, how do we, first of all, learn how that power works? But the issue is using the power to dominate and control. That's what Frodo has to give up and the symbolism of the ring being tossed into the fires of Mount Doom. It's not, we don't have to, again, give up all our technology and move into a cave. The challenge is how do we deal with power? This is the big question. And that means at the personal level, that's why we have to confront our own personal shadow, because we all have this little, let's call it an inner character that would like to have everything done our way. I know how things should be done, and I'm going to force everybody to do it this way, right? That's what has to be given up. It's the use of power to dominate and control, instead of using the power to heal and to tend to the life force. Like the elves live in absolute harmony with nature. Like Lothlorien, the elves literally live in the trees, and their role, as they see it, is to help or is to beautify nature, to celebrate the beauty and the miracle of the natural world in such a way that we are constantly in relationship with it, rather than trying to use the power of nature to dominate and control both other human beings and nature. That's hubris. And hubris is the killer of humanity. And in Lord of the Rings, it's Boromir who is the character that plays that out. Boromir thinks that he can use the ring for good, right? And this is always the hubris that, if I have the ring, and this is why Gandalf couldn't take the ring, because he knew that he would be corrupted. And that's the mark of wisdom. You don't use the power to dominate and control, but instead you learn about the nature of that power, and you bring it to you meet nature in that place. And in the Lord of the Rings, nature kind of rises up to support the struggle when the Ents rise up. And see, I think that we can deal with the power shadow within ourselves as individuals. That little tendency to want to, make other people do what we want them to do because we think we got it right.
Which is force, actually. So is it that the One Ring, is it better to say that the One Ring represents force over other people, whereas power is something more like with the elves, what you're talking about, where they're more organically, I don't know, going to the wellspring of life.
Yeah.
Like drawing, spiritually, mentally, physically, they're kind of drawing from the light and life itself.
Yeah.
And then the ring is more of a kind of like worldly force, like dominating and exerting your will on people who don't necessarily want it, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is that other aspect? I mean, you said our naivete is one of our shadow sides, but it would seem equally,
think so.
It would seem equally that the other, it would be this kind of hubris when it goes too far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You think of the stereotype of the SJW concern troll, but you could also think of the stereotype of, and this is tricky because when people critique the modern world, oftentimes white people get wrapped up in that because we created the technologies and then we benefit from them, but at the same time there's the whole it's our just to speak frankly, it's our technologies that are used to, even if they're used by other people, used to turn countrysides into parking lots, right?
Yeah.
So that's the other. Would you say those are the two main shadow sides you'd identify in Western man? The naivete, but also the overbearing of that dominance of nature.
I'm not sure I know what you mean by the overpowering dominance of nature.
Well, the turning forests into parking lots
Into
and strip
parking lots.
malls kind of
Okay,
thing.
yeah.
Everything being about commerce, everything being commerce and technology and this and that. And I know people listening are going to say, well, it's really other people who are more into commerce than we are. But
well, whatever.
we still have to deal with the ramifications of our gifts to dominate nature, to create technology. And sometimes in dominating nature, you cut your nose to spite your face.
Right.
You cut down all the trees. So, the hippie types have a point with some of that stuff.
Sure. And I mean, all of this is a function of psychological maturation, where I would see us humans as undergoing like a maturation process that brings us into a greater awareness of what our issues are, namely naivete and this idea of hubris. This comes out of an immaturity, and humanity at large, I would say, is immature. We haven't yet become fully adult, or let's say elvish. See, my take on what the elves represent is what we humans are capable of. That we are capable of attaining that level of consciousness that elves represent. But we're not there yet. That's why at the end of Lord of the Rings, the elves leave. They go off to the Undying Lands as if to say, okay, y'all, here you got rid of the Ring of Power. Okay, now you've got to build the new age of men. So now it's up to you.
Yeah, it's like
we already figured this out.
Yeah, that's like they leave to make room in Tolkien's story. They leave to make room for humanity to take that step up to replace them, to achieve that level. Well, it's a very interesting discussion. Regrettably, it's time to tap out. But what an awesome way to start 2022 on tap, discussing this sort of just underpinning, but also the overview of a spirituality and energies and potential forces behind the scenes, or at least things that are harder to see with our own eyes. But it's really been an exciting discussion. What I'd like to do first is take a look and see if we have, I think we have one financial gift from the great Brad C. And let's get a round of applause for this champion and leader in service to white well-being, financially gifting $20. Thank you, brother. And he says folk tithings and has some heart emojis. We really appreciate that. Thank you so very much. And before we do actually tap out, I want to hear, Loralee, your final thoughts. And if you could please, again, let folks know where they can find you. And then we'll get the same from Mr. George.
Okay, well, actually, Jason, I would like to hear your thoughts on, from your myth regarding everything we've talked about, because I would say that your myth of Prometheus brings forward to our modern times what Tolkien introduced us to, and I think that that you in your story really got down deeper into the archetypal dimension of things. And if there's time, I would love to hear your thoughts based on your work.
I thank you so very much for asking. I think that we'll save it for round two. So that'll be a cut and thrust for folks to come back for the round two when we have Loralee back. But so I'm looking forward to that. But any other thoughts that you want to share before we tap out of here today?
I don't think so. This has been a really great discussion. So thank you so much for this.
No, thank you so much. Mr. George.
Well, yes, welcome to 2022. Thank you, Loralee. It's a lot of fun to speak as always. And we have the afterparty.tv that has the archive of all of these shows and the going freeze. So this will be up soon. You could always search different guest names, different topics. Everything is tagged and organized there. My site is thegreatorder.com. And we hope that you and your loved ones have a good, safe weekend, and your 2022 is off to a good start. And we'll all be speaking again very soon.
Well said, brother. It was magnificent starting off 2022 with all of you on tap. And a big thank you to Brad for the financial gift, and to everybody who was commenting and having a splendid little conversation in the live chat. We appreciate and love you all, and looking forward to a very exciting year of tap and wonderful guests to come. We look forward to having the great Loralee back to talk more about these very, they can be nuanced, they can be delicate, they can be quite powerful. And it's ideas that move continents, and at the same time are ideas that are subtle enough to move the passions ever so slightly inside of each and every single one of us. And for us, I think we know where we're headed, and that's the recapture of our destiny for Western kind. Very excited to be doing that with all of you. And we look forward to seeing you all again on tap next time.
Thank